That's when we have anaerobic respiration. And what's anaerobic respiration? Is the breaking down of glucose molecule without the presence of oxygen to release. This time around is going to release carbon dioxide and alcohol instead of carbon dioxide and water in the case of aerobic respiration. In anaerobic respiration, it releases alcohol and carbon dioxide and a little of energy. So you can actually be asked to differentiate between aerobic and anaerobic respiration, and you could also be asked to state some similarities between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So I believe that as I'm talking, you can pick one or two things or one or two points. So what happens to the product of glycolysis, which is pyruvic acid, when oxygen isn't present? Let's see the chemical equation below. All right, this is glucose, C6H12O6. You should know that formula. C6H12O6. That's the chemical for your glucose. In the presence of oxygen, it produces carbon dioxide and alcohol. Carbon dioxide and alcohol. All right, how do you write your alcohol? C2H5OH. Then maybe in balancing your equation, you put 2 here and you put 2 here in the front, and you put 2 here in front of your carbon dioxide. But note that your aerobic respiration involves your anaerobic respiration involves the breaking down of glucose in the absence of oxygen to produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. Don't forget that energy that is released during anaerobic respiration is usually very, very low when you compare it to that of aerobic respiration. Now, there are some cases. Let's look at some cases where anaerobic respiration is possible in human. When an athlete is running, all right, you can see this is the picture of someone running. Your body will have to produce energy for you to run. But in a case where, and for your body to produce energy, there must be supply of oxygen. But at some point, your body might not be able to meet up with the demand of the supply of oxygen. So at that point, what happens? Your body will have to begin to break down glucose in the absence of oxygen so that you can actually complete the race. And in that case, when your body has to break down glucose without oxygen because your body cannot meet up with the demand of the release of oxygen, there is what we call production of lactic acid. All right, anaerobic respiration in man can actually lead to production of lactic acid, and that lactic acid is could be dangerous to the body, so your body has to look for a way to quickly get rid of it. Accumulation of lactic acid is what leads to muscle pull. I don't know if you've experienced it before, when you are running and at a point you feel that pain in your leg. All right, it's because your body, there's excessive accumulation of lactic acid in your body. Can we move on? All right, now if glucose is not present, of course, we have said it, that the product of glycolysis, which is pyruvic acid, will enter into an alternative process, and that process is called fermentation. All right, fermentation refers to the metabolic process by which organic molecule, that's normally glucose, are converted into acid, that's your maybe into acid, gases like your carbon dioxide, or into alcohol. All right, you have alcohol like your ethanol, methanol, in the absence of oxygen. So note that fermentation is an anabolic process. Fermentation is an anabolic process. Let's move on. So where do fermentation occur? Fermentation occurs in the cytoplasm of your cell. you should note that while fermentation occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, your aerobic respiration occurs in this mitochondria of your cell. I'll take that again. Fermentation occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, while your aerobic respiration occurs inside your mitochondria, the mitochondria of the cell. So aerobic respiration occurs in mitochondria, while your anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. That's another difference that you should note. We have two types of fermentation. We have the lactic acid fermentation and we have the alcoholic fermentation. I've explained the lactic acid fermentation. That's the one that we experience during rigorous exercise, all right, when our body needs to break down glucose and there's little supply of oxygen. Then let's see alcoholic fermentation. That one is very, very useful in all these brewery, wine making industry. Let's move on. I've explained this lactic acid fermentation. All right. Before we move on to alcoholic fermentation, you should note that lactic acid fermentation also occurs in some bacteria and some mold. Your mold are fungi. They occur in it. And whenever you're taking cheese, just know that your cheese is a product of lactic acid fermentation. When next you are taking that yogurt, all right, that yogurt, maybe fresh farm yogurt, whatever name it is, know that it's a product of lactic acid fermentation. Don't forget that fermentation is an anaerobic process, all right, the breaking down of sugar molecule or glucose molecule in the absence of oxygen. All right, so let's see alcoholic fermentation. We have wine making, all right, all those ever wine, Valletta, all those wine that you're taking, they are all products of alcoholic fermentation. For those of you that drink malts, Amstel malts, Maltina, whatever name, Dubic malts, they are all products of alcoholic fermentation. You can see this, they are brewing it here. You can see it's undergoing fermentation. For those of you that eat bread, at least everybody is a staple food. Everybody eats bread, all right? So alcoholic fermentation is also used in bread making, all right? So when you mix your yeast, for those of us that have tried baking before, you mix your yeast. Your yeast is an anaerobic organism, all right? That means it can ferment, it can utilize your glucose, that's your sugar, to produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. Let's see what will happen when your yeast produces carbon dioxide. All right, after like an hour, you see, because of the carbon dioxide that has been produced by the yeast, you can see that your dough will have risen. It will have risen. All right, then by the time you now bake it, you have something like this. When you finally slice your bread, you can see the hole, you can see those holes, all right, is as a result of carbon dioxide that has been released during the fermentation process. All right, and that's what gives our bread that light texture. So bacteria that rely upon fermentation play a very important role in the digestive system of some animals. And without these bacteria, we will be unable to fully digest our food. So in a nutshell, we talked about cellular respiration, that it's the breaking down of glucose molecule to release energy. We have two types of cellular respiration. We have the aerobic respiration, the anaerobic respiration. The aerobic respiration takes place in the presence, glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen, while your anaerobic respiration, glucose is broken down in the absence of oxygen. Your aerobic respiration normally takes place through 3 stages. You have your glycolysis, That's the breaking down of glucose to give you pyruvic. Your pyruvic will now go into your Krebs cycle. Your Krebs cycle, through series of enzymatic reaction, releases lots of energy that finally goes into your electron transport chain to release more energy. And don't forget that at the end of your aerobic cellular respiration, you normally have 36 to 38 ATPs. While for your anaerobic respiration, it's the breaking down of glucose in the absence of oxygen. Energy produced there is relatively very, very low. All right, we have two types. We have we have fermentation as an example of aerobic respiration, and we have two types of fermentation. We have the lactic acid fermentation, and we have the alcoholic fermentation. Your lactic acid fermentation is normally experienced when your body is unable to produce the required amount of energy, maybe to meet, the required amount of oxygen rather, to meet up with the demand of your body, especially during rigorous exercises. And we have alcoholic fermentation, which we use in the production of malt, wine, cheese, bread. So we have come to the end of the lesson today. If you have any question, I need you to drop it for me and I will surely respond to it. Thank you.